In the midwinter of 877, the existence of England hung on a thread. The Vikings had triumphed everywhere. The last surviving Anglo-Saxon king, Alfred, fought a desperate guerrilla war in the swamps of Somerset. But here, in his darkest hour, he had a dream. St. Cuthbert made a prophecy to him that from this place his descendants would become kings of all England and lords of Britain. Alfred took the dream as a mark of destiny. Alfred beat back the Vikings, but at the end of his life, his people still lived in a land torn by war. At this point in the story, it's by no means certain that Alfred's kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons will survive, let alone that one England will emerge. Now Alfred's children continue the family plan, and one of them is described by a medieval chronicler as a person of extraordinary ability and mental toughness, the planner of one of the most brilliant military campaigns in the whole of the Dark Ages. And she's a woman. It's one of the great untold stories of British history. Athelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians. This is a family story. 3 generations of the most remarkable, the most gifted family in our history. And to pick up the tale, we need to go back to the last months of Alfred's life. Here in the British Library is a crucial clue to how Alfred hoped to shape events after his death.
We have been digitising a lot of our medieval manuscripts in full and putting them up online.
It's a fantastic idea, isn't it, that wherever we are in the world we can click on this. We're looking for Alfred's last will.
Here it is, the Liber Vitae from the New Minster in Winchester. In this book we've got a copy of the will of King Alfred.
Will starts on 29 verse... Oh yes, here we go.
And we can zoom in.
Tremendous.
Here's Alfred's name at the beginning of the will, and you can really see, you know, the sort of individual pen strokes of that scribe.
Alfred, West Saxoner King, with gold skiff. That's absolutely amazing, isn't it? You can see every crinkle.
Every stroke.
And clues here to a bitter family rift. And he speaks like we do in wills.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's disposing the royal property to his chief children, the sons, Edward and Ethelweard, get most. I mean, Edward the future king. His daughter Ethelflaed, who's already married and gone, so her dowry's been paid, if you like, if you put it in that way. And Athelwold minus Brothers Sunna. This is his brother's son, whose dad, of course, had been king before Alfred. So he gets Godalming.
Yeah. I think this is the first mention of the name of the town of Godalming.
And Guildford. And Staining.
Yeah.
That's all he gets.
Yeah.
Edward gets about 18 estates, doesn't he? But this, so he might have come out of this meeting where the will was read out feeling a little aggrieved, perhaps.
Yeah.
But brilliant. So Alfred had cut his nephew from the succession in favour of his children by his wife Aelswith. And here's Aelswith. This is his wife, isn't it? The farm, the estate at Lambourne and Wantage, which is where Alfred's born, isn't it? And Eddington, where he won his greatest battle.
Yep. It's really quite an interesting psychological document, and he gives these properties that are very important to him and associated with key events in his life to his wife, which is
sentimental.
Nice touch. I don't know. You could read it like that, I think.
There's a little touch about him, his character, isn't there, do you think? He's really trying to nail down the succession, isn't he, do you think?
Absolutely is, I think, and, and particularly, for his own family, his own son, so, he wants to, make very, very clear what's going to happen, because there were rival claimants to the throne.
Each Alfred king smärde ymset yrviset min fadder och strimja brodrum bekväm. Svitjore svitjlentjest vare that se fängt och öl. Da jag hörde och en människo yrvige flyttu. Att hit namich man naveln använde, utom slas var ett hit självpjekvede.
Early medieval royal families' genealogy conferred legitimacy. And the West Saxon royal dynasty had a pedigree second to none. Just look at this. The Wheel of Fortune. This is a later medieval royal genealogical roll, 20 feet of it and more. And in a brilliant piece of graphic design, it shows you the family tree of the Anglo-Saxon kings. Here's Ethelwulf, Alfred's father, and underneath him, the four brothers who successively became kings of the West Saxons. Alfred's the youngest, the last of those kings. But if you follow the green line down, you can see how Alfred outflanked the descendants of his older brothers and established his own branch of the dynasty, from which, incidentally, our own queen today is distantly descended. But the son of King Ethelred, the Atheling, Prince Athelwold, the man who got Godalming in Alfred's will, is cut out completely. And in the early Middle Ages, in the Viking Age, hell had no fury like an Atheling scorned. And a renegade prince could always find an army to back his cause. Half of England was under the Danelaw, ruled by Vikings settled since Alfred's day. And as soon as Alfred's son Edward took the throne, his embittered cousin made his move.
Zaje rad Athelwald, his father and son, som hamat Winburn. On sägdes att de valde Oder, och Cesar Liban, och Cesar Legion. Under sam sa bestallhe hine und nicht und wari, und gesuchte som herre und Northumbrum. Und hier hine underfing hon him to Köninge.
For the new King Edward, it was a deadly threat. Wessex couldn't have two kings. And to see what happened, we have to go back to Cambridge, to the source we followed through this tale, the original manuscript of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It's a contemporary narrative now. It's being written as these events go on. Alfred the Great has died in October 899, aged about 50. Edward's crowned Pentecost, Whitsunday, 900. And no sooner was Alfred dead and Edward crowned than hungry athelings began to prowl, chief among them Athelwold. Here it is in the Chronicle.
Herra spånadelward van herre on Erstenglum to onfriði, at hier hergadon over Merchnaland.
These were shattering events for the royal family. The redoubtable Queen Mother Eadgifu, 60 years later, looked back on this time when she was a little girl and her father, Sigehelm, the Earl of Kent, had gone to the war in East Anglia, paying off his debts before he went. The denouement of the campaign took place on December the 13th, 902, between the Northern Fens and the Devil's Dyke. With his Viking allies, Prince Athelwold struck down all the way into Wiltshire, plundering and burning. And then Edward retaliated by attacking Danish territory in East Anglia, ravaging the countryside. Between the River Ouse at Huntingdon and all the way to the Fens in the north around Peterborough, they just burn the land. Vastatio, depopulatio, they called it. As far as these massive dikes here in Cambridgeshire, built in the 7th century to defend the kingdom of the East Angles, and still a huge obstacle. Imagine columns of smoke across the horizon, and somewhere beyond, the Viking army, Danish army led by Prince Athelwold and the Danish king Erik.
Daarvoor Edward koning efter så herradost mächte his fjärde Gadrian, und överherrgade Elherreland betog Dikum und Husan.
The Chronicle says the place was called the Home. In Anglo-Saxon times, this was the end of the dry land. From this point, the deep fens stretched across the Whittlesea Mere and all the way to the Wash. And somewhere close to where we're standing, the battle was fought in December 902. The bloodbath of the Home was remembered for generations. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, King Edward had issued an order for a general withdrawal for all the units of his army. But the Kentish detachment, who were the vanguard and the furthest north, refused to obey orders, stayed where they were, even though the king sent them 7 messengers. They were caught by the Danish army under Prince Athelwold. The Kentish nobility were wiped out in the battle. All their senior men were killed. But even though the Danes won the battle, it was their losses that were the most significant. Their king, Erik, was killed, several of his big leaders, a Mercian prince was fighting on their side, and most important of all for King Edward, Prince Athelwold himself died in the fighting. The key threat to King Edward as king in Wessex had been removed. So King Edward had won, but at great cost. He was still forced to make peace. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle doesn't admit that, but battered by his losses, the king was compelled by necessity. He met the leaders of the Danes not up in the Midlands or the North, but in the heart of rural Buckinghamshire. The place was on an ancient route from Mercia into the Danelaw, called Ittingerforda. Here at the ford where the old track crossed the river Ousel, they parleyed, and Edward gave them silver and treasure to buy peace. And above all, to buy time. Through an age of iron, wrote one churchman. A succession of savage winters with thick snow and extreme cold brought famine and misery. To pay for his army, Edward had to squeeze every last penny from his starving people. From Surrey, one tenant wrote to the king,
"Dat land is nu earlier waard, en sa hit arst min slavert met och lät, sa was sitt erveles, en mit haden folke en morot. Son is daar nu erves, fast de strange winter lavet haft, nian eld ridro, en sar hund niont is je sauenre akkara. For God is lovan vidas weth, at so saristoe londis maran ne wilnia."
But sometimes in history, ages of iron can be more important for the future than ages of gold. Now a new character enters the story. The daughter of Alfred the Great, King Edward's older sister. The wife of the Lord of Mercia, she was in her mid-30s. Her name in Anglo-Saxon, Alfred. Noble beauty. Here she is. And what's interesting about this is she's still remembered as a woman of power and of high education and intelligence. Just listen to this. This is the caption underneath. Ethelfrid, la plus sage de toutes femmes séculaires, was the most wise of all lay women, and she ruled the kingdom alongside her brother with great wisdom and great intelligence.
The eldest child of a king, very conscious of her position in the dynasty, a daughter very aware of her relationship with her father, and through marriage to the Mercian prince, one might call him, she took what she had learned at the court of her father to another court, to the Mercian court. And she attempted to instill a similar political culture there.
The ancient kingdom of Mercia stretched from the Severn to the Trent. It had long been a rival of Wessex, but they'd found common cause against the Vikings. They fought together, their royals intermarried. And Ethelfrid had roots here. Her mother was Mercian, and so was her husband, whom she'd married when she was 16 and by whom she had a daughter. In the early Middle Ages it was hard for any woman to take a leading role in events, but without her, England might never have happened. And in part that was because in Mercia royal women had long had special status.
Women were terribly important transmitters and legitimizers of male power throughout this period. Not so much in politics in the formal sense, because I don't think women, royal women, were invited to devise agendas for assemblies. That was pretty much a male field. Still less to ride into battle. But women played a terribly important role in culture, in the culture of the court. In fact, you could say the Queen was at the heart of that culture, alongside the King. Being educated at Alfred's court must have meant that she imbibed a kind of training for rulership. As far as her intellectual training was concerned, Alfred's biographer is rather keen to stress that it was the same as her brother's, as Edward's.
Athelflaed's lost biography is only now being pieced together from clues which are still being uncovered, rescued from the accidents of time and war. But of course the history of women as a whole has been erased everywhere, and perhaps Athelflaed herself understood that, for someone in her circle recorded the story of her deeds for future generations. The main version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written in Winchester, tells the story from the point of view of King Edward. It completely cuts out the story of Athelflaed, his sister. What you would really love to have would be the story from Athelflaed's point of view. But astonishingly, embedded in this later manuscript is a chronicle written in the Midlands, maybe originally in Latin, whose central character, whose hero, if you like, is Athelflaed, the woman. So following the annals of Athelflaed, we can tell the story of the next 20 years, not only from the point of view of the Mercians, but from the point of view of the woman. A short copy of the lost original, it's a mix of the public and the private. Starts right on the middle of the page, with the death of Athelflaed's mother, here Ealhswith forferne. But then it moves on to her deeds, starting in 907 with the refounding of the Roman city of Chester. 907, the city of Chester was restored.
Here was Leicester, near Edneywood. We bebodde Athelradlys eldermannis en tisweefes, Athelflaede.
With Vikings from the Irish Sea on one side and the Welsh on the other. If you went from Chester, you could follow the Roman road network straight to York. Once you have Vikings who are ruling in York and in Dublin, Chester would be a natural kind of meeting point for shipping, and I think that makes it really strategic.
Chester soon became rich on the Irish sea trade, and to protect it, an Irish source says that Athelflaed settled a Viking army as a colony in the north of the Wirral.
Athelflaed at that period donates land to them so that they might settle. Whilst one might be tempted to think, oh, well, that could be a little bit fanciful, it could actually have been a good strategic move if we remember that the foundations of Viking Normandy was Vikings being given land on the Seine estuary to defend against other Vikings. Maybe Athelflaed had a similar idea in mind when she gave Vikings strategic land at the entrance of the River Dee and Mersey.
There's a Dee over there, and then over that way is the Mersey. In the 10th century, people's connections would have been from here in Wirral across the Mersey to their kin in what was southwest Lancashire and the other side of Merseyside, but much more so with Ireland. That's where they had come from. In 902, this is where they'd settled from, so their connections, their family connections, must have clearly been across the water in Ireland. This is very characteristic of the Viking period. A disc-headed pin, probably 9th, 10th century in date, still sharp.
Can't believe that.
After 1100 years.
The Vikings, having settled on Wirral, sort of get a bit impatient and they get greedy for power. They can see that Chester is developing into quite an important port, and that they then besiege the town. Got accounts of how the people in the town defending their settlement very vigorously, throwing beer and beehives over the wall at the attacking Vikings, and eventually, Chester is preserved and the Vikings are kind of put back into their settlement on the Wirral.
Ich, Alfred, Mercian Hlavdir, hecht beworken sabor, elm san folke to je berge.
And then in 909, she sends an expedition across Viking territory to rescue the bones of the great Northumbrian saint Oswald.
Her was Sanctus Oswaldis Leech, geladet, of Bertenia, on Merce.
Bringing his heavenly power to her newly restored city of Gloucester. We're in the centre of Anglo-Saxon Gloucester here. This is the meeting place of the streets, as you can see, south, east, north, west. That's the Roman pattern. These main streets go down to the Roman gate. And what Ethelfleet does, once she's restored the wall, is create a pattern of streets that go off, settling burgesses who'll provide the garrison, but also civic life, markets and all that sort of stuff. And little churches all along. Michael, Martin, Mary, Kuneburg, good old Anglo-Saxon female saint down by that gate, and that way, St. John's.
It's a political act. They're refounding Gloucester, restoring this, what was in fact a ruined Roman town with tumble down walls and very little inside it except ruined buildings.
The main street plan is Roman, but the pattern of streets, just like Winchester.
It's an exact match, or at least the eastern half of the street pattern is an exact match for Winchester and other towns which Alfred has restored and relaid and created, and it's partly military and partly commercial.
Here she built a church where the bones of St. Oswald were placed in a gilded shrine, where she planned she and her husband would be buried. These fragments of sculpture, once brightly painted, came to light in Carolyn's excavations.
Well, we would have seen a great wall there, with an arch in the middle and a vivid wall painting above it, with, we don't know, certainly with an angel included. You would go through the archway up to a high altar where the relics of St. Oswald might have been. Further still is another building which is sunk into the ground. It's a crypt. We can be certain that there were pillars holding it up in the middle. It's very like the Royal Mausoleum at Repton. It's interesting, isn't it, that it's so small compared with the great Carolingian churches which were contemporaries. It could have been enormous, it could have been very ostentatious, and they built it small maybe it was the shrine that was important, and the relics were important, and the size and the ostentation were not important.
Humility was a very important virtue to her. I like that. But the constant in her life was war. In 910, Mercia suffered a devastating attack by a huge Viking army from Northumbria and the Danelaw. Over midsummer they cut a swathe through the heart of Mercia, ravaging all the way down to the Bristol Avon. And then they turned up the Severn Valley to make their way home. Our key source for what followed is a 10th century chronicle by one of the royal family, but the only manuscript was destroyed by fire in 1731.
Every so often you find a little word, a little piece of text. This is just one small fragment of one medieval manuscript which was damaged by the fire in 1731. Someday somebody will come along and actually find which place and which text it is.
So not giving up.
Never give up hope, Michael.
As so often in Anglo-Saxon history, a key source has been lost. But now, with the benefit of new scientific techniques, the experts are restoring the fragments. And among them, now just a handful of blackened folios, is the Chronicle of Alderman Athelweird.
There is the microfilm, but of course it's a microfilm of a black manuscript, and therefore in itself the microfilm is also illegible.
We're therefore indebted to an Elizabethan antiquarian, Henry Savile, who in 1596 did this wonderful printing. It's absolutely fabulous book. It's gorgeous. And the Great War of 910 is described with wonderful circumstantial detail. They went across the River Severn into the western district along the Welsh border. They devastated and took huge plunder, and on their way home, rejoicing in their enormous spoils, they were still in the process of crossing the River Severn at that bridge, he says here. Then they were intercepted at this place called Wednesfield, in Woodensfelder Campo, which today is right in the middle of the most industrialised district of the West Midlands, next to Wolverhampton. Vikings were caught in line of march. Ethelweird says the Mercians intercepted them at Wednesfield, where the Viking vanguard hastily formed a battle line, waiting for the rest of their army to catch up. And there, says Athelweird, the Mercians with their West Saxon allies launched their attack, and they overwhelmed them in a storm of spears. Hard to imagine, I know, but the road here running along the canal between Wolverhampton and Wednesfield is what the Anglo-Saxons call the Ealda Strait, the old highway which went from the Severn Valley at Bridgnorth into Danish territory in the East Midlands. That's why the battle was fought here, in the Field of Woden, fitting place for a Viking apocalypse. The fighting ended at Tettenhall near Wolverhampton, which gave its name to the battle. Thousands of them were killed, says the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Among the dead, 2 kings and 10 major leaders, including the seer or the soothsayer. One imagines the Viking equivalent of the army chaplain. All of them hastened to the Hall of Hell, says Athelweird in his chronicle. And the date is interesting. It was the 5th of August, the feast day of St. Oswald, whose bones Athelflaed had brought out of the Danelaw only the previous year. So she and her generals had tracked the invaders and then intercepted them and attacked them on the ground and the date of their own choosing. For Athelflaed herself, the afterglow of victory was tempered. Her husband of 25 years was dying, suffering from long-term illness or perhaps from wounds. Earl Ethelred has been short-changed by history. For as the Mercian chronicle says, he was a man of great virtue, who had performed many noble deeds.
The chronicle records the death of her husband, the Lord of the Mercians, in 911. Ethelred the Mercian Lafort, the Lord of the Mercians, and almost immediately afterwards the chronicles calls her the Lady of the Mercians, Athelflaed Mercian Lafdir.
Her position is analogous to that of some Carolingian queens when the king was absent, at war or on pilgrimage. She ran the comitatus, the following, the court, and when Athelflaed's husband died, all this was amplified, and the political relationship that held the Mercian kingdom together was between her as a lord, a female lord. They had to invent, in a way, a new word for this. Lady. That relationship between her and the leading men of the kingdom was what enabled the Mercian kingdom to continue and succeed.
So backed by her earls and thanes, her friends as she liked to call them, she was now partner in the kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons with her younger brother Edward.
Edward the Elder is a good medieval ruler, a good early medieval ruler. He's an effective early medieval ruler. He adapts to circumstances and is ruthless where it counts. Edward has experienced a gritty childhood, a gritty youth. He'd experienced the difficulties of his father's reign against the Vikings. We can imagine him being dragged along on campaigns. He's given experience of leadership in the 890s. Edward brooks no nonsense, and when his cousin Athelwold, who had a very, very good claim to the throne after the death of Alfred, Edward responded very quickly. He basically hunts him down. That's not to say that Edward wasn't a pious ruler in conventional terms. I mean, he founds the new Minster in Winchester. This enormous church. That's a sort of grand statement of a new dynastic chapter opening up in English kingship.
Edward was a far more complex man than history gives him credit for. He made law, corresponded with foreign churches, and he kept up his father's contacts with Rome.
Our sources describe large numbers of English crossing the Alps, risking attacks by brigands and by Saracens for the sake of prayer at the shrine of St. Peter in Rome.
Some of them, indeed, to end their days here. hostels of the Saxon quarter, still remembered on Roman street signs, can seldom have been busier.
The oldest part of the complex comes from the time of Pope Gregory II, when the King of Wessex, Ina, founded the Schola Saxona, destroyed by fire and restored under Pope Leo IV, who's the Pope who received Alfred as a little boy. How about that?
Edward sent a special embassy here, headed by his Mercian Archbishop, Plegmund, who had helped King Alfred in his translation program. They took gifts, and perhaps brought back manuscripts like this book of Psalms, later owned by Edward's son, Athelstan.
The embassy sent by Edward the Elder in 908 came, we're told, bearing large sums of money, elemosina, as a gift from the people of England. So even in the most difficult times of Edward and Athelflaed's fledgling kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons, the English tenaciously and loyally hung on to that link with Rome, which they felt, to an extent, defined them.
Edward König mögede his witan, that his smerdom äle, hoheore fris betre beonnechte, såna hit samwas. And he axade besa, qua tosare bote kiramolde, je belande, je besawa.
Together, brother and sister now began a joint offensive against the Vikings of the Danelaw.
One of the bequests, if you like, of Ethelflaed is her really very active campaigning, founding one borough after another. And if you plot these out on a map, you can see how her and Edward really kind of cooperated, if you like, to defend the interests of Mercia and Wessex, and also to strengthen border zones, to bring areas of strategic significance under their sway. And so they made a really powerful alliance, you know, really see them kind of working together.
Taking a leaf out of Alfred's book, the key to her warfare was fortress building. Some were restored Roman towns, some reused Iron Age hill forts, and others were built on new sites.
Her kom Ethelflaed, neersna glavdier. Und so na helgen aven in Wintioni Sancta Crucis to Sheachete. And sa bur je timbrede. And sas ilken is sa at Brugge. Her godo voor jevendem voor Ethelflaed neersna glavdier. Met allen meertjen to Tamworth hier. And Sabur saw you timbrede.
And it was Tamworth, the old residence of King Offa, that meant most to the Mercians.
It was a great rectangle of ditches and earthen ramparts with a wooden palisade centering on the church and with the royal palace, the royal hall next door to it. In fact, the main Mercian street is still the high street today. We're just on the very edge of Mercian territory. You go across to those hills there and you enter the Danelaw. Athelflaed, when she came here with her army that summer of 913, was bringing the war right up into Danish territory. But even more than that, it was a great symbolic moment for the Mercians. As the chronicle says, she came here with all the Mercians, meaning all the earls and the thanes of the Mercian kingdom. And she did it with God's help, God's blessing.
We are forgotten. We're seen as a bit of a small market town.
But you know it was an important place as a political administrative centre right in the heart of Mercia, so we know that it was really an important place.
In Athelfleet today, they've not forgotten the glorious past of Mercia, has it?
No, not at all.
And here in Mercia, royal women had played that role before. King Offa's queen, Cynethryth, is the only Anglo-Saxon queen shown on coins. Do you ever imagine what Athelfleet might have been like?
I do, actually. I have this vision of her being a really sort of strong, warrior woman, and we know obviously that women in Anglo-Saxon society were peace weavers, and I think that she had kind of earned her role. She knew how to negotiate.
It's interesting, isn't it? Quite a lot of her achievements were by negotiation rather than by war, although she was still prepared to lead the army.
Absolutely. And she obviously could command the army, and they were happy for her to lead them. So I think that that's a very unique position for women to be in.
Ego, Athelflaed, Domina Merciorum, double meo fideli amico achome, aliquam partem terram, con consensu miorum amicorum.
Leadership in this period really had to be personal, because they were going to have to spend a lot of face time with their people. There wasn't some massive administration that was running things, a figurehead who would walk in and shake hands at the right time. She really had to be very active in making negotiations, planning campaigns, being there at the site where things were happening.
Year by year, Athelfleet's chronicle faithfully records the dozen boroughs she rebuilt or founded.
At Edisbury. And an overworldna harvest thar at Waringwitchen. En thu erkenjere foran to middenwinter thar at Rumkoven.
Step by step, consolidating Mercian power on the Mersey and on the borders of Wales and the Danelaw. To some of her older subjects, it must have felt like not so much a building programme, but the rebirth of a kingdom.
It's amazing how the patterns can have been imposed so long ago, isn't it?
Oh yes, indeed. I mean, we're entering Oxford now pretty much exactly the same route as the Anglo-Saxons would have entered it. Have this extraordinary tower, which is both indeed a church tower, but also part of a defensive structure.
Yeah.
And it might even have served as a sort of watchtower, looking to the north, which is the most vulnerable part of the city.
It's just fabulous, isn't it? So the main northern ditch of the town running on this side.
Yep, it would originally just have been an earthen rampart laced with timbers, and then to reinforce that, because inevitably as the timbers rot it would have started to push out, they faced it with stone. So for the first time really since the Roman period, you would have had a stone-walled city. These are such huge infrastructure projects, and you can't imagine one person being there all the time at each of these. On the other hand, there must be a degree of personal oversight. In a situation where there are no means of kind of mass media or communication otherwise, she must to some extent have exerted personal control, personal involvement, and it's really just an extraordinary achievement to be almost everywhere at once.
Like her father Alfred, she was also a patron of learning. Educated in his court, she was literate and cultured. And Mercia was a centre of scholarship. The key figures in Alfred's translation programme had been Mercians. And one Mercian manuscript perhaps even offers us a way into her mind. It gives us an entrance to a characteristic aspect of their psychology, which is the tension between worldliness and piety. Written by the West Saxon saint Aldhelm, 7th century saint, very famous writer, and it's about virginity and chastity.
Contempta mundi blandimenta.
She is to be praised who rejects worldly pleasures and suppresses carnal desires, for they are worthless.
In the best of all possible worlds, Oldhelm says, chastity is the best armour against the wiles of the devil. Maybe there's a thread here. Athelflaed's father, Alfred, according to his biographer, had given himself up to the pleasures of the flesh when he was a young man, and then felt very guilty about it afterwards, and thought that the terrible affliction he had, the bodily affliction that he suffered from all his life, was punishment, and in the end renounced sex altogether. Now, Athelflaed's his eldest child, his beloved first daughter, and after the birth of her first child, her daughter Alfwin, it was such a difficult birth, according to a later story, that she too renounced sex as a religious vow. Could there be a thread there? For all their great achievements as leaders in war and peace, both of them were battle winners. Maybe this intense inwardness and self-reflection and anxiety about the body was an ever-present.
But the other ever-present was still war. In 917, brother and sister continued their campaign against the Danelaw, and Athelflaed attacked the Danish base at Derby.
Athelflaed, Mercians, God of voeten jinden, begeert Thabor, theis harten dioribu. Thawaran of slayene here thayene feowe, the here besoch jewaram.
The Mercian army's broken into the town, and there's fierce fighting going on. And then the chronicle says, there, right inside the gate, 4 of the thanes who were most dear to her were killed. In the oldest Anglo-Saxon heroic poetry, one of the big themes is the bond between the Lord and his warriors. It's a reciprocal bond. The Lord is generous with land and treasure and hospitality and affection, friendship, as they said. And in return, the thanes give their service and their unswerving loyalty, even laying down their lives for their Lord. And here in the battle for Derby, Athelflaed's thanes lay down their lives for their lady.
The news of her triumphs spread like wildfire. Early in 918, the Danish army in Leicester submitted without fighting and chose her as their lord. And then from their capital in York, the Northumbrians sent pledges that they too would bow to the Lady of the Mercians. In North Britain, her reputation now far surpassed her brother. To the Irish, she was the most renowned queen of the Saxons.
I think that charisma that she had did kind of cross political boundaries as well. There's a record in the year 918 that the men of York were willing to submit to her authority, which is quite amazing, really, that, you know, that so often in the writings, the Vikings of Northumbria are portrayed as the inveterate pagans and plunderers, and yet this woman was able to offer perhaps a more peaceful solution.
And when a new wave of Viking invaders from Ireland occupied the Tyne Valley, she sent ambassadors to the Scots to form a northern alliance for mutual help and defence. In 918, the Vikings were defeated at Corbridge on Hadrian's Wall, and a later Irish source even claims she was there in person. Othara, Earl of the Vikings, it says, fled into a dense wood, and the Queen ordered the wood cut down, and all the pagans killed, and her fame spread everywhere.
get the impression that she felt she had to do this lest she be perceived as a weak leader. She had to make sure she made these shows of strength, but at the same time, she was a very able communicator and used that skill to her advantage too.
But then, in June 918, at the height of her power,
Ac swydd I chradlicha, thas the hi thas I wordon hafta, heo je voor. 12 nichten midden sumera, binnen Tammerworthia. Thu echte van jere thas the heo, meertjne aanweld met recht glavo doma, heldende was. En hure liedj lief binnen Gleorchestre.
she was in her late 40s. Of her tomb nothing survives, save perhaps a broken coffin lid and one tiny fragment of gold. With Athelflaed dead, Edward hurried to Tamworth to bring Mercia under his power, only to find that the Mercians had chosen a new lady, her daughter Alfwyn. It's the only time in British history that a daughter succeeded her mother.
The Mercian assembly accepted her daughter in the absence of a son. I think that may well have been because they saw a daughter who I also think was likely then to have been married, but perhaps to another Mercian. It was a way of maintaining over time Mercian independence. And it had a chance of succeeding.
Her daughter takes over as a real sense of independence from Wessex. This is resolved by Edward marching up to Tamworth and imprisoning her. Presumably put into a nunnery, but we can't be sure about that. But judging by the way the royal families worked in that period, that's the most likely.
Yeah, so they were very ruthless and unsentimental about royal women and royal daughters.
The West Saxons especially.
The elimination of nieces and nephews was not new. That was another feature of early medieval dynastic politics, which was played out yet again in 918. Yet Alfred's fate was rather like that of Charlemagne's nephews. That's to say, we know nothing about it. But we have horrible suspicions, which may be justified.
Athelflaed, her chronicles said, had been a person of extraordinary ability and intelligence, who steered the kingdom strongly, justly, and calmly.
I think Alfred can indeed be imagined as having the diplomatic and international role of a king. Certain people had an interest in editing her out, and this is always, in this period, true of women, I think. Their activities and achievements have been underestimated. Alfred managed to salvage something by commissioning her own history, as her father had commissioned his, but also by having such a remarkably high profile.
When Athelflaed dies, both she and Edward are at the height of their power. In the later years of Edward's reign, his power actually starts to decline, and I think that's almost because he doesn't have his powerful sister Ethelflaed still active in Mercia on his behalf.
And that brings us to the last entry in the Chronicle of Athelflaed.
And Athelstan was of
Merchum, Yakoran.
For when Edward died, the Mercians chose as his successor Athelflaed's foster son, Athelstan, the son she never had. And not just as their lord, but their king. Athelstan was King Edward's firstborn, but by a concubine, and as a boy he'd been sent to Mercia to be brought up by his aunt. But when he was 5, his grandfather King Alfred had invested him with a Saxon sword, belt and cloak. So it was said, in omen of a kingdom. These investiture ceremonies are really the beginnings of medieval knighthood. They took place around the age of 14, the transition from being a boy to being a young man, a warrior, a knight. The word is actually Anglo-Saxon. Now Alfred the Great couldn't wait that long. He was dying, so he gives his blessing to his only grandson. In the world of early medieval royal families, such a gesture could have meant nothing. But rather like Alfred's own investiture by Pope Leo, age 5, in Rome, for Athelstan himself, the ceremony carried the mark of destiny. Next, how Athelflaed's foster son became the first king of all England.
And the final part of King Alfred and the Anglo-Saxons is here on BBC 4 at the same time next week. Meet more of England's early queens tomorrow night. We've part 2 of She-Wolves at 8. Back tonight now though, and Dan and Peter Snow explore another modern battlefield and a conflict which has become known as the 20th century's forgotten war.